Come, Holy Spirit, at the close of this day, whisper our heart in the depths of our heart, that we may pick up a word from you and discern your will in our life, and also be aware of our responsibility in our time on earth. We have this word from James the Apostle. Be subject to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. And then humiliamini in conspectu Domini, et exaltabit vos. Pride is the fundamental sin of Satan, and when we behave in a way which is out of our place, we're following his path, and that is something to be looked at in retreat, for a proud soul is difficult to work on and is his own worst enemy. I came across this and read it with some interest. Although you are more informed than I would be on these matters, it's worth listening now to the unfortunately deceased Father Gabriel Amort, because he had a few intuitions which are worth knowing. This came out in 30 Days. It's the well-known rivista in Italy, 30 Giorni. It's reduced, basically, it's in the wake of what happened unexpectedly that the ritual for exorcists was actually eventually published. And his reaction to it is sussed out by this good interviewer, who is obviously of faith. Now, yes, it is ready. Last year, the CEI, that's the Conference of Italian Bishops, didn't want to approve it because it contained errors in the translation from Latin to Italian. And we exorcists, the ones who would have to use it, we took the opportunity to point out that on a number of points we were in disagreement with the new ritual. But the underlying Latin text has remained the same in this revised translation. This long-awaited ritual has turned into a farce, he says, an incredible obstacle that is likely to prevent us acting against the demon. And the interviewer asks a heavy accusation. What is it that you are thinking of? So he goes on, I will give you but two examples. Two spectacular examples. Point 15 treats of evil spells and how one should behave when dealing with them. An evil spell is an evil brought about on a person by means of recourse to the devil. It can be accomplished under a variety of forms, like spells, curses, the evil eye, voodoo, and macumba. The Roman ritual used to explain how one should confront it. The new ritual, on the other hand, categorically declares that it is absolutely forbidden to perform exorcisms in such cases. Absurd, assurdo. Evil spells are by far the most frequent causes of possessions, and evil procured through the demon. At least 90% of cases, he says. It is as good as telling exorcists they can no longer perform exorcisms. Then, point 16 solemnly declares that one should not carry out exorcisms if one is not certain of the presence of the devil. This is a master stroke of incompetence. The certainty that the devil is present in someone can only be obtained by carrying out an exorcism. I was talking some time ago to an exorcist who works in one of the countries there between North and South America. And he had a practice of his to try and discern whether there was a demonic presence around. And he would start mentally in Latin to use prayers of exorcism. And if there was a reaction, then he knew this was it. By the way, that same exorcist told me that, unfortunately, the whole drug world, and he knew about it there in that part of the world, is infested with demons, because in any major exportation of drugs, somebody is always brought in to curse them to the maximum. Somebody who's working, of course, for the dark side, because in that way it works better and brings in more gain. And therefore, he continued, it might need exorcism if you've got somebody on heavy drugs. Demons have got into him. He did also tell me this bit, that there's a certain bonhomie between evangelicals, Protestant charismatics, and Catholic exorcists, because the same things come out. There's a certain authenticity in Protestants who take the demon seriously, and they find the same problems. And unsurprisingly, quite spontaneously, they know that if it's the real thing, sometimes they have to get hold, actually, of a Catholic priest who has the faculties. They sometimes secretly, don't admit it in public, of course, but they know that there's a power that we have they haven't got, which is interesting. I close that parenthesis. So, what is more, he goes on, the authors of the ritual failed to notice that on 2 points they were contradicting the catechism of the Catholic Church. For this points out that exorcism should be practiced in cases of diabolical possession and in those of evil caused by the demon. It also recommends that it be performed on people as well as on things. And in things, there is never the presence of the demon, there is only his influence. The declarations contained in the new ritual are very serious and very damaging. They are the fruit of ignorance and inexperience. Then the question comes, but wasn't the new ritual put together by specialists? Not at all. During these last 10 years, 2 commissions worked on the ritual. One, which was made up of cardinals and which was responsible for the prenotanda, the initial provisions, and the other, which was responsible for the prayers. I can confirm with certainty that none of the members of these commissions had ever performed an exorcism, had ever been present at an exorcism, or ever possessed the slightest idea of what an exorcism is. Here lies the error, the original sin of this ritual. Not one of those who collaborated on it was an exorcism specialist. How is that possible? It is not me you should be asking. Then he draws a parallel here in history. At the Vatican Council, each commission was aided by a group of experts who assisted the bishops in their work. And this custom was kept up after the council, every time that parts of the ritual were redrafted. But not this time. And yet, if there were ever a subject that demanded the participation of specialists, it was truly this. Question? And yet, we exorcists were never consulted. And what is more, any suggestions that we were able to make were unfavourably received by the commissions. It is a paradoxical history. Do you want me to tell you what happened? Of course. At the Second Vatican Council, as the Council had requested, the various parts of the Roman ritual were gradually revised. We exorcists were waiting for Title 12 to be addressed. That is the exorcism ritual. But apparently this ritual was not considered an important subject. For the years went by and nothing happened. Then, quite unexpectedly, on the 4th of June 1990, there was published a ritual ad interim. So a trial ritual. This was a real surprise for us, as we had not been consulted beforehand. And yet, we had prepared a whole series of requests in view of the ritual's revision. We were asking, among other things, that the prayers might be amended so that invocations to the Virgin, which were completely absent, might be incorporated. That the number of prayers, specifically relating to exorcism, might be augmented. But we were not given the chance to make any kind of collaboration or contribution. However, we were not discouraged. After all, the text had been drawn up for us, and, as in his letter of presentation, the prefect of the Congregation for Divine Worship at the time, Cardinal Eduardo Martinez Somalo, had asked the Episcopal Conferences to send in, over the following 2 years, any advice and suggestions made by priests who would make use of it, we got down to work. I brought together 18 exorcists, chosen from among the most expert on the planet. We examined the text with great attention. We used it. We immediately commended the first part, in which the evangelical foundations of exorcism were summarized. This part deals with the biblical and theological aspect of the question, and on this head, no lack of competence was apparent. So they're pleased with that. It is a new section not found in the ritual of 1614, which was composed under Paul V. Besides, at that time, there was no need to recall these principles. Now he's going back to the time of Paul V, when there was no need for that explanation, since the whole world knew them and accepted them. So now he sees that there was a need for this premise. Today, on the contrary, this is indispensable. But when we came to examine the practical part that demands a specific knowledge of the subject, the total inexperience of the writers really showed through. We made numerous observations, article by article, and we sent these on to all interested parties: Congregation for Divine Worship, Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, and the Episcopal Conferences. One copy was handed directly to the Pope. How were your observations received? Badly, male. And they achieved nothing. We had taken our inspiration from the dogmatic constitution Lumen Gentium, in which the Church is described as the people of God. In number 28, it speaks of priests collaborating with bishops, and in number 37, it is clearly stated, and this applies to the laity also, that, here's a quote, by reason of the knowledge, competence, and preeminence they enjoy, they are empowered, indeed sometimes obliged, to manifest their opinion on things that pertain to the good of the Church. Unquote. This is exactly what we did. And we were ingenuous enough to think that the directives of Vatican II had found their way into the Roman congregations. But instead, we found ourselves up against a wall of rejection and derision. Now, derision is a strong word. The secretary of the Congregation for Divine Worship gave a report to the Commission of Cardinals, in which he said that those who had contacted him were bishops and not priests and exorcists. And with regard to our own humble attempt to help them by giving our advice as specialists, he added, and I quote, verbatim, "One should also take note of the fact that a group of exorcists and," here quote, "demonologues," who subsequently formed themselves into an international association, were busy orchestrating a campaign against the right, unquote. An indecent accusation. We have never orchestrated a campaign. The ritual was intended for us, and yet not one competent person had been called upon by the commissions. So it was only to be expected that we should seek to make our contribution. Does this mean then that for you the new rite is unusable in the struggle against the demon? Yes. They were looking to give us a blunt weapon. Efficacious prayers that had been in existence for 12 centuries, were suppressed and replaced by new ineffective prayers. But, as luck would have it, they threw us a lifeline at the last moment. What was that? Now here we have the figure of somebody I quoted actually this morning. It was the, by then, emeritus prefect of the Congregation for Divine Worship, who was writing this article on what enables a soul to have active participation on the level of the soul itself. It's a good man, Cardinal Jorge Medina. So this new prefect for Divine Worship attached to the ritual a notification in which he specified that exorcists were not obliged to use this ritual, and that if they wished, they could ask their bishop for authorization to use the old one. The bishops must, in their turn, ask for authorization from the congregation, which, as the cardinal writes, willingly accords it. Willingly accords it? That is a very strange concession. Then Amott answers, do you want to know where it comes from? Here we have the inside story. It comes from an attempt made by Cardinal Ratzinger, the prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, and by Cardinal Medina to introduce into the ritual an article, it was Article 38 at the time, which would authorize exorcists to use the previous ritual. It was undoubtedly a maneuver in extremis to fend off on our behalf the grave errors found in the definitive ritual. But the two cardinals failed in their attempt. Then Cardinal Medina, who had understood what was at stake in this matter, decided to grant us this lifeline anyway, and he added a separate note. How do you exorcists see opposition within the church? We are very badly treated. Our brother priests who are charged with this delicate task are treated as though they are crazy, as fanatics. Generally speaking, they are scarcely even tolerated by the bishops who have appointed them. And the most striking manifestation of this hostility, we organised an international congress of exorcists near Rome. We asked to be received by the Pope. To avoid pressurising him and adding yet another audience to those he had already granted, we simply asked to be received in a public audience, that is, that of Wednesday in St. Peter's. We were not even asking him to address us his personal greetings. We made our request for an audience in the proper manner, as will be perfectly recalled by Monsignor Paolo Di Nicolo of the Prefecture of the Pontifical House, who received our request very warmly. But on the day before the audience, Monsignor Nicolo told us, to tell the truth, he was very embarrassed, and it was very apparent the decision did not depend on him, not to present ourselves at the audience, and that we had not been admitted. Unbelievable! 150 exorcists from 5 continents, men appointed by their bishops in accordance with the rules of canon law, which requires that they be men of prayer, knowledge, and good reputation, and thus in some way the cream of the clergy, ask to take part in a public audience with the Pope and are shown the door. Monsignor Nicolo told me, I promise to immediately send you a letter explaining the situation. 5 years have passed, and I am still waiting for this letter. It was certainly not John Paul II who excluded us, but the fact that 150 priests should be forbidden to take part in a public audience with the Pope in St. Peter's shows what kind of obstacles exorcists encounter, even within their own church, and to what extent they are frowned upon by a great number of ecclesiastical authorities. You fight against the demon every day. What is Satan's greatest success? To succeed in making people believe that he doesn't exist. And in this, he has almost succeeded. Even within the church, we have a clergy and an episcopate who no longer believes in the devil, in exorcisms, in the extraordinary evil that the devil can cause, nor in the power that Jesus has given us to drive out demons. And by the way, this power is real. There are a lot of suicides in the wake of Halloween. And they're not coincidental. For 3 centuries, the Latin Church, in contrast with the Orthodox Church and various Protestant confessions, has almost entirely abandoned the ministry of exorcism. All Eastern Orthodox priests can exorcise, have the faculties automatically, as they can chrismate at baptism. And the charismatics take this very seriously, and they have a certain power, but not our authority. Nevertheless, the demon doesn't like them. As the clergy no longer practice exorcisms, as they no longer study them and have never seen them, they no longer believe in them. And nor do they believe in the devil either. We have entire episcopates who are hostile to exorcisms. There are countries in which there is not a single exorcist, as for example Germany, Switzerland, Spain and Portugal, and actually we could almost add Ireland. There's only one bishop who has in recent times appointed 2 exorcists. It's the new bishop in Wexford. He's a very good man, Alphonsus Cullinan. He has also, in his short innings already as a bishop, a new bishop, got, I think, 10 new communities into his diocese. And he's a very good man. But he does not want them administering this outside his own diocese. It would be too heavy for them.
You can't
Oh, is that so? That's the reason. Okay.
You have the authority of the law.
Okay. But what I meant was that he doesn't want people coming to them from other dioceses.
That's possible.
Yeah. A terrifying deficiency. You did not mention France. Is the situation any different there? There's a book written by Isidore Froc, the best-known French exorcist, entitled Exorcists, Who Are They and What Do They Do? This work, translated into Italian, was written at the request of the French Episcopal Conference. Nowhere in this book is it stated that exorcists, in certain cases, perform exorcisms. And the author has several times stated on French television that he has never performed an exorcism, and that he would never do so. Out of 100 French exorcists, there are but 5 who believe in the devil and carry out exorcisms. All the rest send those who contact them to the psychiatrist. And the bishops are the main victims of this situation of the Catholic Church, in which belief in the existence of the demon is in process of disappearing. Before this new manual appeared, the German episcopate sent a letter to Cardinal Ratzinger in which they declared that there was no need to create a new ritual because exorcisms should no longer be performed. Is it down to the bishop to appoint exorcists? Yes. When a priest is approved, or rather, when a priest is appointed bishop, he is faced with an article in the Code of Canon Law, which gives him absolute authority to appoint exorcists. The minimum one can ask of a bishop is that he has taken part in at least one exorcism, given that he has to make such an important decision.
Who is the first exorcist?
Exactly, the bishop. And there are one or two who do it, but very few. But what I surmise from hearing my experience out there in Ireland is this. It's not that the bishops actually don't want to appoint one, because they know there are cases, people, I mean, I've had to approach the bishop indirectly myself, through the secretary, is there an exorcist? And one is told actually there isn't. But I think the real reason is this. Good priests are so scarce on the ground that it means the sacrifice of one priest. Because if they're into that, they won't get out of it. So, he's wanting that they should be aware of it, and that at least they have some experience of having been present at one, to see the gravity of the situation. And so, it's not the case. But if a bishop finds himself before a serious request for an exorcism, which is to say, one has not been made by someone deranged, and he does nothing, he commits, he says, a mortal sin. Strong language. And he is then responsible for the terrible sufferings endured by this person. Sufferings which sometimes last for years or even an entire lifetime, and which he could have prevented. Do you mean to say that the majority of the bishops in the Catholic Church are in a state of mortal sin? When I was a child, my old parish priest taught me that there are 8 sacraments. The 8th is ignorance. And the 8th saves more than all the others together. To commit a mortal sin, there must exist grave matter, but also full awareness and deliberate consent. And by the way, when I was in the monastery where I was ordained in Italy, that came up because people would come to us, obviously, and not only having to ask for questions to absolve reserved sins. Abortion was reserved where we were, and it wasn't easily granted, but this came up as well. And the Archbishop came to see us, and his line was this: I'm not against it, but if you do, you won't get out of it. He was warning us. Everyone will come to you. And it means being well formed in a course in Rome. Eventually, when the community moved back to France, where they are now, Frère Dominique who was my next door neighbour, he was appointed exorcist. He was a very good man, but the demon got his own back on him, and he's now, he's left the priesthood. So it's a dangerous business.
Demons can tell you your own sin.
Yes, that's why if you do an exorcism, you have to go to confession.
Don't argue, don't get in a dialogue.
Right.
It's completely forbidden.
Right.
Because he can't do anything with it. But he knows you.
Fascinating. Yes, I was told that if you want a confession first, you can't bring it up, it doesn't exist anymore, even for the demon. It's cancelled. So, that gets them off the hook a little bit, but still, one mustn't presume, at least in Ireland, the bishops are good people. It's just that they're up against the shortage of priests is the real problem. But if one does not believe in the existence of Satan, does one's faith remain intact? Is it still the Catholic faith? No. I will tell you a story. Now, this is a famous exorcist in Venice, long deceased, but he worked on the island of San Giorgio. When I met Don Pellegrino Ernetti for the first time, a celebrated exorcist who had practiced in Venice for 40 years, I said to him, if I could speak to the Pope, I would tell him that I meet too many bishops who do not believe in the devil. The following afternoon, Father Ernetti came back to see me, to tell me that same morning he had been received by John Paul II. Holiness, he had said to him, there is an exorcist here in Rome, Father Amort, who, if he met you, would tell you that he knows too many bishops who do not believe in the devil. The Pope answered him briefly, he who does not believe in the devil does not believe in the gospel. That is the reply which was given to him and which I repeat. Then, eventually he goes on to the question of what happened after the Second Vatican Council. The Council had asked for certain texts to be revised. This is in general now. But this order was disobeyed, as there was a desire to rewrite them all from scratch. No thought was given to the possibility of making things worse rather than better. And many rites were spoiled by this mania for jettisoning everything from the past and of rebuilding everything from top to bottom, as though the Church had, until today, hoodwinked and misled us, and as though they had now finally arrived a time of great geniuses, of super theologians, of super biblicists, of super liturgists, who knew how to give the Church what was sound. It is all a lie. The last council simply asked for these acts to be revised, these texts to be revised, not to be destroyed. The exorcism ritual, for example, was to be revised, not rewritten. There were prayers in it which had been in use for 12 centuries. Before suppressing these ancient prayers, which had proved so efficacious, one should have thought long and hard. But no, we exorcists have all tried out the new prayers and the new ritual ad interim, and we have come to realize that they are absolutely ineffectual. But the rite of baptism for children has also been spoiled. It has been so drastically overhauled that the exorcism against Satan has virtually been eliminated. This had always held a very great importance for the Church, so much so that it is called the minor exorcism. Paul VI himself publicly protested against this new rite. I didn't know that bit. It's fascinating. And he goes on, we find the same generation of the rite in the new benedictionary. I have read its 1,200 pages minutely. Well, any reference to the fact that the Lord must protect us against Satan, that the angels protect us from the attacks of the demon, has been systematically suppressed. All the prayers for the blessing of homes and schools have been suppressed. Everything should be blessed and protected, but today there is no longer any protection against the demon. There no longer exists any defense or any prayers against him.
All the prayers are about persons.
Persons and not things. I noticed that. It's pretty. The whole thrust is different. It's true. Even when one is blessing the chasuble or whatever, it's towards the person.
Stricte dictu, there is no benediction.
Yeah, that has come to my mind. I shouldn't tell you this, but every time I do one, I add one of my own. So it goes on. And he also comments on the situation worldwide. When the faith retreats, superstition makes progress. G.K. Chesterton. To become a non-believer is not to believe nothing, but to believe everything. Then the question of, is he afraid of the demon? Afraid of the demon, he says. And the demon sees me. His braces fall down. And he started every exorcism with this liturgical rite. Are you watching? Father? He started every liturgical exorcism with this liturgical rite. Just to show who was in charge. And so that reminds me of what the controversial figure of Malachi Martin once said, the devil, a bit of angelic trash. And so I heard that actually from one or two, the last thing that one must be is afraid before the demon, because he's a loser. And we have power that he actually, in the last resort, is afraid of. But he's a thorough nuisance, and we must take him seriously.
He lost the war.
He lost the war.
But
his
guerrilla is still lurking.
Well put. So, we need our panoply of war. And of course, I still use every Holy every time I celebrate Holy Mass, whatever rite, whatever situation, I always say, at least mentally, the prayer to St. Michael. It's pretty powerful. We often give it also the sacramental penance, because everyone knows it in Ireland. So God protect us.
But our biggest problem is, as exorcists, is that our colleagues don't do the work before.
The triage.
Yeah, that is to speak with a person.
Right.
To hear the story. To have confession.
Confession, yeah.
To emphasize spiritual life and so on and so on. Yeah. When people are coming to us, we have to do all the work.
That's right. In fact, the Padre Amort said that a good confession is worth far more than any exorcism.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, that is true.
And sometimes we meet people who are helped with a good confession, a good spiritual, and also a good guidance, to build up a spiritual life.
Yeah.
To go to adoration, to go to pray your rosary, to read the life of the saints, and so on and so on. Yeah,
the organism is not functioning, but these make it function. Regular confession in particular. Therefore, there's a weakness there.
Yeah.
There's no immune system. Yeah.
And when people don't want to go to confession, you feel there is something.
That's right, exactly. The abhorrence of the sacred, that's a sign, and it's out there, unfortunately. So God protect us, but we're on the winning side.